You have been given the exciting but daunting task of becoming the dungeon master for your gaming group. I have been a dungeon master for 25-ish years, give or take, of course. I've been playing this wonderful game called Dungeons & Dragons since a very long time. We're talking about 35 years or so. And I've run all sorts of games. I ran a campaign through all of 3rd and 3.5, a group from level 1 all the way up to level 18, a group of 3. I currently am about to start, once I kill all my players, my 4th consecutive campaign in 5th edition D&D with 10 players. So I have a wealth of experience as a dungeon master, as a role player. Now, all that being said, this is not the right way. It's not the only way. It's certainly not the best way. It's just my way, and I'd like to share my tips, tricks, and experiences in helping you, basically just sort of guiding you a little bit and holding your hand in this journey to become a dungeon master, which is a wonderful thing, but it is a great task and responsibility. So let's jump into it. There is not a tried and true specific order, though I did kind of order the steps that I will go over in some level of importance, and one thing will flow into the next. I will put them up on the side here. First and foremost, you want to focus on pacing. I will constantly refer because it keeps me in check and going through the checklist of everything I want to cover, and helps to prevent me from doing what I'm doing now, which is rambling too much. So pacing. You want to have good energy at the table. Eat good food, drink a lot of water, rest well, meditate if you must. Do whatever you can to become excited about the game. There's a lot that goes into that. Some of the main things, which I'll kind of cover a little more later, are who are the players at your table. You've got to be invested in those players. You have to care about them. This is not to say that you can't go to a convention and be a dungeon master, but for a first-time dungeon master or a brand new dungeon master that's maybe has a year or so of this storytelling experience under their belt, I strongly recommend not doing the convention type thing and try and have some players that you're familiar with, because they can help bring some good excitement. Also, the game itself. What adventure do you run? Are you making your own world? Ensure that you're doing something and playing and running your players through a space and an atmosphere that you feel invested in. If you're not excited, your players aren't going to get excited. You want to know the rules. Now, this video can translate beyond just Dungeons & Dragons. This is for all game masters out there. If you're doing anything in the tabletop role-playing space, know the rules. It just helps to know what your limitations are, what the player's limitations are, but most importantly, you won't bog down the details of the game and the flow and the immersion by having to keep referring to something to look things up. And that's something that's easily in your control. A lot of other things can be very subjective. Knowing the rules, if you just spend your time reading the book cover to cover of whatever game you're going to run, that will go a long way for you. It'll also just build some confidence. Don't bog down the game with minutia. When you're dealing with rules, you're not going to know everything. Even if you read it cover to cover, you're going to forget things. If it's something that's not overly important. Now, if it's a rule that getting it right or wrong, kind of what do they call the key play of the game in the Super Bowl, if it's something that's going to determine whether a PC in your group lives or dies, maybe spend a little bit of time knowing that and obsess about it a little more. But otherwise, let the little stuff go. Don't bog down the narrative with minor details that don't matter right now. On that note, maybe just simply tell the players, I'll decide this. I'll rule it this way for now so we can move on, but I'll take a look into it later and I'll get the details and I'll get it exactly correct next time. So another thing you can do is you can ask another player to look things up while you move on. Maybe a veteran role player, or just simply if you feel like there's a rules lawyer, was what they call it, at your table. Hey, how does this work? And use that. It's okay. Depending on the number of players, one thing that is a big part of pacing is you don't want to let one player shine for too long. You may have a rogue that has a really good backstory. Maybe he's a veteran role player. This is not his first rodeo. Yet he's never really been a DM before. So you're the one that's taken the task of having to run this player who you're pretty confident knows and is more involved in the game and the hobby than you are. Don't let that player shine too much. And it doesn't have to be that veteran role player. It can be whoever it is. Someone that just is really excited and they've invested a lot of backstory. They want to go to the local city and they want to learn about the local thieves guild and they want to do their own thing. Personally, from my experience with running 10 players, if I have one player that I spend 10 minutes with at the table, isolated, that's 9 players that are now talking about what movies they're going to watch next week. They're on their phones. I'm losing the table. So don't lose the whole of the group for one player. Okay, a way that you can kind of help combat that is you can do what I call like spread the wealth and use a timer if you have to. Go in clockwise order and give each player consistently throughout the whole session, over and over for hours. Give each player a minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it may be. The players will start to latch on to that, and they'll realize that even when one player is doing something, by going around the table, it brings confidence to the other players that they're going to get their moment as well. So as I said, you can literally use a timer or a clock or something like that. There's a wonderful creative individual in this hobby space named Runehammer. I support him on Patreon. I follow him on YouTube. He talks about maybe always consider staying in initiative, sort of round-based timing throughout the whole session, even when you're walking through the tavern or you're meandering throughout town and one player wants to do something at the general store and another player wants to go talk to their family and another, whatever it may be. Combat, it's easy because, your turn, and it's supposed to be 6 second rounds and so on and so forth. But maybe keep that sort of timing. It not only keeps a sense of urgency, it also just gives a good flow to the overall pacing of the game by sort of keeping everything in that real nuts and bolts. It keeps you focused on what's going on by kind of moving around the table in that direction. And lastly, for pacing and energy is take breaks, especially for you. If you're feeling like a little lackluster, you don't know what the situation is at the table. We play every other Saturday evening from 5 p.m. to midnight. My wife included, maybe she was on call all night. Maybe a player at your table had to work that day and he's been up since 3:30, 4 a.m. He's getting tired. You can kind of wrangle that in and get good energy and let people have their moments. But when you are running low on energy, that can really start to permeate throughout the table, and it's going to make players, even if you have a justified reason for it, it's going to start to make your players feel as though you're not caring about the game as much. So take breaks, even if it's just a quick 5-minute break, or perhaps the break needs to be longer and say, hey guys, we're going to call it early for the night. People are kind of fading a little bit. I have to keep repeating myself, so on and so forth. So that's it for pacing. Next, what you want to focus on is planning one session at a time. Your goal is just to get through the session, whatever the allotted time is that you're intending to play. If it's, my case, 7 hours or so, kind of in planning, think about, I know, and some of this may take some experience, I know that running 10 players through combat, because there's so many rounds and ticks that I have to check off, because there's so many players, a combat is going to take 90 minutes to 2 hours. So I know if I have 2 fights planned for the game, or maybe 1 fight and 1 very highly likely random encounter, that's about 4 hours of gameplay. I need to come up with about 3 more hours. Don't think beyond that. Now, again, without the experience, you may not be able to wrangle in and know all the details of what's going to occur within that space. Some things may take 20 minutes where you thought they were going to take 5, and other things may take 2 minutes where you thought they were going to take 50 minutes. So it just depends on where you go with it. But the point is don't create 20 hours of content that's going to happen, because you're not going to get to 20 hours of content in one game night. Because what will happen is when you put that 20 hours of content to the east, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to railroad the group and kind of take the control out of the players' hands by funneling them to the east, because you spent a bunch of prep time and you've got 20 hours of content there, or your players are going to go west and they're never going to get to that 20 hours of content. Now, that may come up later on, but the point is you're putting a bunch of effort into something that hasn't come up yet. So plan one session at a time. If you're playing a 3-4 hour session, as you'll often see online on Twitch and, Critical Role type stuff, 4 hours, think of what, for me, 3 combats, that's my whole gameplay. I don't need to have a whole lot more detail beyond that. Next, as far as planning one session at a time, also another thing you can focus on is starting really, really small. As I said, don't worry about the bunch of stuff that's happening over in the east that they're not going to get to this session, but it could be cliche and video gamey, but rats in the cellar, spiders are in the local woods, you have a weird haunting, there's a disappearance, there's some sort of kidnapping, rescue the princess. Work those sort of things into your game. Start really small and then extrapolate from there, okay? Next, and this is point number 3, consider pre-published modules, one-shot adventures, things like that, before you start going all Tolkien and world building. There's a big difference between what you create for a novel or the world building of Tolkien and how it translates at the gameplay or at the table. You're a new DM, so you don't want to have to juggle all of the things that you're trying to think about from a design point of view as a game design world builder, while also juggling how it translates into 4 hours of gameplay. So maybe start a little smaller. If you've already got something and you already have this world put together and you've got a PDF document that's ready to be published, then, again, what trumps it all is to be focused on the things that excite you. So if this is what excites you, your own worlds, that's what I always run, then go with it. But the modules just help you focus a little more on how the things flow at the table a little easier, because you don't have to worry about what's all the way in the east, because a module pre-published stuff is often going to simply say, here's the backstory, read this to your players before you start the campaign. When your players go east, read this to them. It's going to kind of help guide you a little bit more. So consider that, just so you don't have too much on your plate to juggle all at once. Also, with world building is you're coming to the table having to present this awesome night of gameplay to your players. You don't know how it's going to be received. And if you combine that with your own world and your own place, and it's not received well, that may reflect on you and feel like they're kind of shitting on your baby, is how I like to quote it. And you may not take that very well. So maybe just remove yourself of that burden and just run something pre-published. Also, if it doesn't work out, if you're not the DM for the group, or someone else decides, I want to give that a shot, or you know what, guys, we just want to get together, but let's not do D&D right now. Let's do another game, or let's just play board games. Let's just hang out. You're not as invested when you do a one-shot, and you're like, we ran a one-shot. We ran, one adventure, one little mini campaign from a book for 4 sessions, and that was 20 hours of gameplay. No love lost, and you didn't waste a whole lot if you move on beyond that. Whereas if you have your own world, you feel a little more committed to it, and you might grind that. What did Bilbo say? A little bit of butter spread over too much bread type of thing. You might have stretched it a little long because you're trying to hold on to this thing. So try and think about running some pre-published stuff. With whatever you run, remember that it is their world. I always like to frame it as whatever story, world, background setting I'm doing or creating or running my players through, that is the canvas. I then hand them the brushes and the paints, and I say, go ahead and paint on it. The canvas defines the dimensions of they can't go too far outside of this, but otherwise I let them create it, and together with my canvas and their drawings, we create art. And it's kind of a real dramatic way of explaining that, but the game is about them. Don't get too attached to your world. You're not going to run out of monsters in the monster manual. So if they kill your bad guy or they come up with something clever, remember, in my case especially, it's my mind against 10. And I've got some veteran role players, some people that have been DMs before. They're going to end up being more clever and savvy than me. Let them win. It's okay. Just move on. Don't get too attached into that. If you're starting, because remember, you're already a figure that's in a position of control and power. You never want it to come off as though you're being too power hungry or whatever it may be. And the best way is to sort of just defer to them. Let them sort of create the content for you. That goes back to what I was saying about don't railroad them and don't overplan a session. Let your players kind of build the world as you go. And that also just helps you creatively because it gives you more fuel. You may not have thought of something, but as your players start poking and prodding and asking questions, now that sparks during the next session when you're planning, you know what, I'm going to put more details into that ruin place because the PCs think there's some lost weapon there that they want to search for. You may not have previously thought about planning a lot in the ruins, but now you want to because the PCs are going there. And when you bring it to the table, it sounds cool to them because they feel like, man, this stuff is really detailed wherever I want to be. And that goes a long way, okay? With the pre-published stuff, a real important point to consider with that, though, is you still want to find something that you're invested in. If you're into Gothic architecture and the creepy ambiance of certain things like that, then Curse of Strahd might fit. But if you don't find anything within the books and the modules, which you should, if you find and you look on DM's Guild and D&D, there's a million resources out there through the internet, YouTube, social media, various forums, RPG.net forums and EN World and all this stuff. You'll find enough little mini adventures that appeal to the things you like. Find something that you like. That's what brings good excitement. Okay, so don't use pre-publish if you can't find anything that you can get behind. That's going to show itself. So I recommend using pre-published though, especially for in the beginning. Last two steps. Number 4, you want to study the craft. Learn the rules, as I said. Know the game that you're running. Also, build a visual library. So it goes without saying that you need to be really, really geeky and nerdy as a dungeon master. So we're talking the things that sound, well, no duh, right? You've got Star Wars and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, Indiana Jones, Dune. You're going to read Patrick Rothfuss and Joe Abercrombie and Tolkien, of course, C.S. Lewis, Stephen King, just from a storytelling point of view and character development. Brandon Sanderson, Erickson in the world of Book of the Fallen, things like that. So read, build up a good visual library. Also look outside the genre. As I said, if you're into Gothic architecture and horror and you know everything about Clive Barker and the creepiness of the characters in Stephen King and Hellraiser and all these other things, and you know, you watch these various movies and you like reading the macabre and the strangeness of Poe or Lovecraft, then that's going to start to inform you towards what sort of world you want to run, because that's what you're good at. That's what's going to bring confidence, and that's going to translate to good energy and excitement at the table. So build that visual library, you know, and if it's something that you found that you think is going to work mechanically for your group, but you're not sure on the genre, start studying that. You know, if it's real high fantasy, find high fantasy books and worlds and other things that you can piggyback off of, that you can steal some ideas from. There is nothing in a vacuum. There are no ideas that are... Everything I'm saying here is on another video from someone else, just said in a different way. So use other people's stuff, okay? Remember, unless you're trying to put it on Twitch and film it and make, you know, money off of it, 99% of the folks, you're running this for your group. So it doesn't matter if you're stealing ideas. You know what I mean? It's okay if you have the general premise. I mean, everybody's rescuing some princess Mario Brothers stuff, and you know, everything can go back to Beowulf and then moving on from there. And oh, so it's the William Wallace thing, and we're being attacked by a larger kingdom and empire. You know where I'm going? So just focus a lot on building the best visual library possible. It's going to give you a little more to kind of go off the cuff and ramble when you need to. Lastly, know when to quit. Ask after every session. Hey guys, what do you think of the session? What can I do better? What can we do better? If it doesn't work out, ask someone else to run. Ask someone else to be the DM. Okay? Even if it does work, always remember that nothing lasts forever. Nothing. So there's new books that are going to come out. There's going to be new versions, new editions. It's okay to transition into... Now, you maybe want to kind of find some finishing point so that you don't just leave everything hanging and kind of find an end goal. But you don't have to look in the book and say, we don't stop until everyone reaches level 20. That's very rare. In my 27 years of being a DM, my group has never reached level 20, ever. Now, they've reached like epic level handbook almost, like level 18, and they've gotten level 9 spells, but it doesn't always have to reach that far. Know when to call it. You know, just as WoW, World of Warcraft, can become stagnant because you've been playing in that world, all the changes and patches, you've been playing in that world for 15 years and a new MMO comes out, it's okay to jump on board with that. It's okay to transition over to even another role-playing game. Maybe you go into something full sci-fi. Maybe you go into Star Wars or Warhammer Fantasy. Find what works best for your group. And as I mentioned way back in the beginning, 20 minutes ago, it's okay if you just say, you know what, guys, we're going to take like a 6-month break just to clear my head so I don't feel as pressured and stressed. Or I'm working on a new world and I'm ready for that in the next campaign. But in the meantime, let's stay together, let's hang out, and let's just play some board games. Because number one point and the number one goal, dare I say that my goal is what should be the goal for others, but I believe this is really big. Your number one goal is to have fun and get the company that you enjoy around you at the table consistently. Because I can tell you from 30 plus years of being a DM, it's being among that group of people, regardless of what edition, game, version, world we were playing in. That's where the stories and that's where the memories are built. And that's what we're trying to do. And as a dungeon master, as the sort of facilitator and narrator that helps create the foundation upon which these memories are built, it's a very powerful, very exciting and amazing opportunity, but it can be overwhelming. So I hope something I've said here will help you realize that regardless of how overwhelming it seems, you can do it. I'm Rich, I'm a DM, and you can be one as well. I hope this video helped. Thanks for watching, folks. See you later.